There is a quiet myth that has woven itself into the way most of us see intelligence. A belief that intelligence is something static, something you either have or you don't. That it's fixed at birth, handed down like a genetic gift, a pre-written story that you are either fortunate enough to live or doomed to accept. But the Stoics, and those who have lived with true wisdom, knew a deeper truth. Intelligence is not a trait. It is a process. A living, breathing, ever-changing phenomenon. It grows or it withers based on how you choose to live your life. And it is within your control. The greatest minds in history were not born extraordinary. They became extraordinary by the way they interacted with life. They nurtured intelligence like one nurtures a flame, feeding it with solitude, curiosity, reflection, dialogue, and action. They knew that to become truly wise is to commit to a way of living where learning is never finished, where understanding is never complete, and where every experience, no matter how small, is a teacher. It begins, perhaps, in the most underestimated place of all: solitude. Modern life teaches us to fear solitude. It tells us that being alone is a sign of failure, of being unloved or unwanted. But the Stoics knew otherwise. They taught that solitude is not loneliness. It is sacred. It is the fertile ground where the seeds of deep thought take root. It is in solitude that you meet yourself without distraction. It is where you can examine your beliefs, question your assumptions, and sit long enough with your thoughts to see where they lead. True solitude is not an escape from life. It is a deeper engagement with it. In solitude you refine your mind. You give yourself the space to challenge your biases, to ask the questions that discomfort you, to explore ideas that do not fit neatly into the mold society hands you. Solitude sharpens the mind because it forces you to think for yourself. It strips away the noise and leaves you with the raw material of your own consciousness. And that is where true intelligence begins to be forged. But solitude alone is not enough. To grow, the mind must also be fed. And the greatest food for the mind is curiosity. Curiosity is not a luxury. It is the fuel of intelligence. It is the engine that drives you to read the book, to ask the question, to challenge the expert, to venture into the unknown. It is curiosity that connects seemingly unrelated ideas, weaving them together into new patterns of thought. It is curiosity that refuses to be satisfied with easy answers and instead demands depth, nuance, understanding. The Stoics lived this principle. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in the world, was also one of the most curious. He did not take his knowledge for granted. He questioned his own judgments. He wrote to himself, interrogating his motives, reminding himself to remain a student of life until the end. And so must you. You must cultivate curiosity not as a fleeting interest but as a way of being. Wake up each day with questions, not conclusions. Approach every conversation, every book, every moment as an opportunity to learn something new, even if what you learn is that you were wrong. Especially if you learn that you were wrong. Because growth begins at the point where comfort ends. And yet, in a world drowning in information, curiosity alone is not enough. You must also cultivate depth. Deep thinking is becoming a rare skill. We are trained for speed, for surface-level engagement, for consuming data without reflection. But speed is not wisdom. Shallow thought leads only to shallow understanding. It is deep thinking, the slow, deliberate parsing of ideas, the willingness to sit with complexity without rushing to simplify it, that leads to true intelligence. When you practice deep thinking, you begin to see the layers beneath the surface of things. You recognize that few truths are simple. You become comfortable with ambiguity, with paradox, with uncertainty. And in doing so, you strengthen not just your mind but your emotional resilience. Because life is not simple. It is layered, complicated, messy. To navigate it well, you must learn to think deeply, not just about ideas but about yourself, about others, about the very nature of existence. This is not easy. It requires patience. It requires time. It requires you to value understanding more than appearances, wisdom more than reputation. But the rewards are immense, because a mind that can think deeply is a mind that cannot easily be manipulated. It is a mind that questions before it reacts, that considers before it judges, that seeks to understand before it condemns. It is a mind that brings light into the dark corners of life, rather than adding to the confusion. And this mind, cultivated through solitude, curiosity, and depth, becomes a beacon not only for itself but for others. You begin to radiate something that is felt before it is seen: authenticity. This is where intelligence transcends mere cognition and becomes presence. A person who has done the internal work, who has sat in solitude, fed their curiosity, and thought deeply, does not need to shout to be heard. They do not need to dominate conversations to be respected. Their very being carries weight. Their words carry the authority not of arrogance but of understanding. They have charisma, not the superficial charm of performance but the magnetic presence of depth. And this depth is what draws others in. It creates trust. It invites dialogue. It fosters connection. Because real intelligence is not competitive. It is collaborative. It seeks not to impress but to elevate. It asks, how can we understand more together than we could alone? And so we come full circle. Intelligence is not something you have. It is something you practice, something you nurture, something you live. Through solitude, curiosity, deep thinking, dialogue, and action, you can become the kind of person the Stoics admired, the kind of person the world needs. A person who thinks independently, feels deeply, acts wisely. Not because they were born different, but because they chose to live differently. And so can you. The journey into cultivating dynamic intelligence continues when we realize that solitude, curiosity, and deep thinking are not isolated practices. They intertwine, reinforcing and amplifying one another. But there is another layer often overlooked, the art of dialogue. Dialogue is often mistaken for debate. In debates, the goal is to win. In dialogue, the goal is to understand. There is a quiet humility required for true dialogue, a willingness to listen not just for the sake of responding but to genuinely absorb, to genuinely reflect. It demands that you step outside of your ego, that you allow yourself to be changed by what you hear if it proves true, that you recognize that every person you meet knows something you do not. The Stoics understood this profoundly. Seneca, one of the greatest minds of his age, wrote letters not merely to preach but to refine his own thinking. Marcus Aurelius journaled as a form of inner dialogue, a constant back and forth between the self he was and the self he was striving to become. True dialogue, whether external or internal, is an act of courage. It requires you to open yourself up to the possibility that your current understanding is incomplete. And it requires you to trust that this incompleteness is not a flaw, but a beginning. When you engage in genuine dialogue, you sharpen your mind against the minds of others. You begin to see new perspectives, to find common ground where before there were only divisions. You learn not just to express yourself more clearly but to think more clearly. And you cultivate an intellectual humility that is the mark of true wisdom. The recognition that the more you know, the more you realize how much remains unknown. This humility feeds back into solitude, into curiosity, into deep thinking. It forms a virtuous cycle where learning begets more learning, where understanding deepens rather than stagnates, where growth becomes a way of life rather than a momentary goal. And something remarkable happens when you live this way. You begin to embody intelligence not as something you show off, but as something you quietly radiate. It informs your actions, your words, your very presence. People notice not because you are loud, but because you are real. Not because you dominate the conversation, but because you elevate it. Not because you always have the right answers, but because you ask the right questions. This is the beginning of charisma, not the brittle charisma of performance, but the enduring charisma of authenticity. Charisma rooted in depth does not shout for attention. It commands it through quiet certainty, through presence, through the way your words carry weight, not because they are many, but because they are considered, through the way your actions align with your values, forming a coherence that others instinctively trust. In a world saturated with noise, depth becomes magnetic. But depth cannot be faked. It must be lived. It must be earned through the slow, sometimes painful work of solitude, curiosity, reflection, dialogue, and action. It must be reinforced daily, in small choices and great ones, in how you spend your time, in what you feed your mind, and how you treat others. This is why intelligence, in the Stoic sense, is inseparable from character. Intelligence without virtue is cunning at best, manipulation at worst. But intelligence married to virtue, integrity, compassion, resilience, becomes wisdom. And wisdom is what ultimately shapes a life of meaning. The Stoics remind us that learning is not merely for personal gain. It is a moral act. To learn is to become more capable of helping others. To think deeply is to become more attuned to injustice, to suffering, to the needs of the world. To cultivate intelligence is to accept the responsibility that comes with knowledge, the responsibility to act rightly, even when it is hard, even when it is inconvenient. There is no neutral ground. You are either using your mind to elevate or to excuse, to build or to destroy, to bring clarity or to spread confusion. The choice is yours, moment by moment, thought by thought, action by action. Living this way requires vigilance. It requires you to guard your mind as you would guard a temple, to be mindful of what you allow in, of what you allow to take root. It requires you to recognize that the world will constantly seek to fill your mind with distractions, with easy answers, with shallow thinking. but you have the power to resist. You have the power to choose depth over noise, understanding over appearances, wisdom over popularity. You have the power to reclaim your mind. And when you do, you begin to embody a different kind of intelligence, one that cannot be measured by test scores or accolades, but only by the quiet strength you carry within. A strength that does not falter in adversity. A strength that does not seek validation because it is rooted in something deeper than praise or recognition. This is dynamic intelligence, not something you are born with, something you build moment by moment, choice by choice, day by day. A lifelong commitment to thinking deeply, learning widely, living authentically. A quiet revolution starting from within. And through it you become not just smarter, but wiser, stronger, freer. The person you were meant to be. As this journey deepens, a profound realization emerges. Dynamic intelligence is not merely about thinking better, but about living better. It shapes not only how you process information, but how you move through the world, how you respond to challenges, how you relate to yourself and to others. And it all comes back to a simple, quiet truth. The way you live is the ultimate expression of what you truly know. The Stoics understood this intimately. They did not study philosophy to impress others, but to master themselves. They did not pursue knowledge for its own sake, but to apply it, to transform their lives from the inside out. Living your philosophy means embodying the lessons you have painstakingly learned through solitude, curiosity, dialogue, and deep thinking. It means refusing to compartmentalize wisdom as something intellectual and abstract, instead weaving it into the fabric of your everyday existence. It shows up in how you treat people, not just when it is easy but when it is difficult. It shows up in how you handle setbacks, not with bitterness but with resilience. It shows up in how you use your time, not squandering it on trivialities but investing it in growth, service, and creation. This embodiment is not flashy. It is not something you announce or parade. It is quiet, steady, and consistent, like a river carving a canyon not through force, but through persistence. And it grants you something rare in today's world: internal coherence. You no longer live with the tension of pretending to be one thing while secretly being another. You no longer exhaust yourself maintaining appearances. Your mind, your words, and your actions align. This alignment breeds a kind of peace that cannot be bought or borrowed. It can only be earned. In this state, you realize that success is not measured by external achievements alone, but by the quality of your character, the depth of your relationships, the impact you quietly make on the lives around you. Intelligence, then, is not the ability to dominate or manipulate, but the capacity to understand, to uplift, to create meaning in the brief time you are given. And the world, though often blind to the quiet work you do, feels the difference. People are drawn to those who live with depth and integrity because it is so rare, so refreshing in a sea of noise and pretense. Your presence becomes a mirror in which others glimpse who they too could become. Your life becomes an invitation, not through preaching but through being. This is the ultimate fulfillment of dynamic intelligence. Not accumulating facts but cultivating wisdom. Not seeking status but embodying service. Not dazzling the world but enriching it. And it requires constant tending. There will be days when it feels easier to revert to the shallow habits of distraction, to coast on autopilot, to drown out the quiet voice calling you to depth. There will be days when it feels tempting to settle for surface-level understanding, to chase validation instead of truth. But you will remember. You will remember that intelligence is not static. It is dynamic. It is a living, breathing process as delicate as it is powerful. And it is yours to nurture or to neglect. Every moment presents the choice anew. Will you think deeply or skim the surface? Will you ask questions or settle for assumptions? Will you live your values or betray them for convenience? Will you cultivate wisdom or cling to ignorance? There is no once-and-for-all achievement. There is only the daily practice, the quiet revolution you wage within yourself, not for applause but for alignment. In this way, every day becomes sacred. Every moment becomes an opportunity. Every conversation, every book, every quiet moment of reflection becomes a stepping stone toward a life of greater understanding, greater resilience, greater authenticity. And in the end, you realize something extraordinary. The mind you have shaped shapes the world you live in. The depth you cultivate in yourself deepens the experiences you have, the connections you forged, the legacy you leave behind. Dynamic intelligence is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming fully yourself, the self you were meant to be before fear, distraction, and shallow thinking led you astray. It is about returning to the source. And from that place, living a life that not only succeeds in the world's eyes, but fulfills you at the deepest level. A life rooted in clarity. A life radiant with purpose. A life that speaks without words of wisdom hard-won and generously shared. This is the way. This is the work. And it is worth everything. At the end of all searching, all striving, all learning, it comes down to a single truth. Intelligence is not a prize to be won. It is a path to be walked. You are not here to impress. You are not here to collect accolades or validate your worth through external approval. You are here to grow. You are here to think deeply, feel deeply, and live deeply. In a world that constantly pulls you toward shallowness, you must choose to be deep. In a world that glorifies speed, you must choose to be deliberate. In a world that celebrates appearances, you must choose substance. This choice is not glamorous. It will not always be easy, but it will always be worth it. Because every time you choose depth over distraction, you forge yourself into something stronger, something rarer. You become the kind of person whose wisdom is not borrowed, but earned. The kind of person whose presence is not loud, but undeniable. And make no mistake, this world desperately needs such people. It needs those who think before they speak. It needs those who seek truth over comfort. It needs those who can sit in solitude without fear, wrestle with hard questions without flinching, and emerge not with certainty, but with clarity. It needs those who do not merely consume knowledge, but embody wisdom. You are capable of becoming that person. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Today. Every moment is an invitation to step into that possibility. Every moment is a choice to either deepen or to drift. And the beauty is you are never too late to begin. You are never too old to think differently, to live more intentionally, to walk a new path illuminated not by the noise of the world, but by the quiet fire you tend within. Let that fire guide you. Let it burn away the trivialities you once thought mattered. Let it forge you into someone who lives by their own clear light, not swayed by opinion, not seduced by distraction, not paralyzed by fear. Become a student of life, forever curious, forever questioning, forever refining. Let solitude be your sanctuary, not your prison. Let curiosity be your fuel, not your fleeting impulse. Let deep thinking be your habit, not your exception. Let dialogue be your sharpening stone, not your battleground. Let wisdom be your reward, not your ornament. And above all, let your life be your ultimate work of art, crafted not for applause but for authenticity. The world will offer you shortcuts. It will tempt you with easy answers, easy entertainment, easy distractions. Smile at them and walk your own way. The Stoics understood, true greatness is not achieved by conquering the world, but by conquering yourself. True brilliance is not a flash of genius, but a steady flame, patient, resilient, unwavering. And that flame already burns within you. Tend it, guard it, let it light your way. Because in the end, intelligence is not what you know. It is how you live. And how you live is the most powerful thing about you. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Stoic Way for more timeless wisdom. Comment below. What is one way you will start cultivating deeper intelligence in your daily life?